Okay, so this week we're going to look at drum recording and some basic principles to get you started when working in the studio. So first of all, I'm sure we're all familiar with what a drum kit looks like, but it's important if you're not a drummer that you become familiar with the terminology. So the fundamentals of the drum kit is the kind of kick drum and the snare, are the two of the main instruments, with the toms. So we've got 3 toms here. Some people end up with more toms, but as a standard kit, you'd probably only have 3 going around here. And there's 2 up on a rack, and then there's a floor tom here. Now, the thing with a drum kit is they make a cohesive sound when played all together. We're all familiar with the sound of a drum kit, but individually, the instruments within the drum kit all have quite different sonic properties, and that's something we need to kind of have in our heads when we're recording a drum kit. So yeah, kick, snare, toms, and then of course we've got the cymbals. So here we've got a crash cymbal and a ride cymbal, similar but with slightly different tone. And then down here we've got the hi-hats. And it's important to note that the hi-hats are actually 2 cymbals, which can be played via a pedal, which opens and shuts them, or they can be hit with a stick as well. So they can produce different tones depending on how they're positioned. So depending on the style of music or the preferences of the drummer, you're going to end up with different variations of a standard drum kit. Here's a couple of examples here. So like generally a commercial pop rock kit would look similar to the examples illustrated on the previous slides. Maybe you'd have more cymbals, different the toms organized in different manner, maybe some more toms. When it comes to jazz, you might have, or hip hop as well, you often have like smaller shell sizes, maybe less toms, less cymbals, that kind of thing. More kind of focus and emphasis based around the performance between kick, snare, and hi-hat. With heavy metal and rock, heavier rock, often you get larger shell sizes, and you also get more complicated hardware layouts like double pedals and things like that, or more cymbals. Fusion kits tend to be a kind of balance between maybe the jazz and the kind of rock setup, but you can also end up with many more combinations of different elements, so they're worth kind of considering. And then also we're seeing a more rise of these kind of technologically advanced setups, this hybrid setup, which are combining acoustic instruments with MIDI triggers or drum pads. The recording of drums is often a pivotal moment in the production of a song. The acoustic drums add this distinctive signature sound to a recording, and most producers will spend a considerable amount of time and resources making sure they get this exactly right. Engineering drums requires a good dose of patience, with the ability to improvise under pressure and the willingness to try something new every time. I think if you've got yourselves a method that you like to use already, or you've, through experience, got some techniques that work, it's good to use those, but then also be prepared to evolve and adapt depending on the situation. While there are lots of different approaches that can be used and adopted to create an exciting and effective drum recording, no specific technique will ever be able to compensate for poor musicianship or a badly tuned kit. So how do we actually accurately represent the sound of this whole instrument that consists of all these different individual elements? So first of all, it's a really good idea to get to know the musician, get to know how they perform, how they like to set up the kit, and listen to the takes being done. So it's worth having, while you're setting up the microphones, it's worth getting the performer to play what they're going to play. And there's no point in just playing anything. It's important that they play what you're going to record, because that will obviously have an impact on where you're going to put the microphones. Be wary of what limitations you face. So think about what choice of microphones you actually have. What does the room sound like? What are the compromises you're going to make there? Because that will affect how you apply your recording technique. And experiment with the instrument. Don't be afraid to change things if it sounds initially bad to your ears. You're the only person who can decide what sound you like, so no one else can choose mic position on your behalf. Just be aware of why you think that sounds nice, but be confident in the fact that you think it does sound nice. Okay, so one of the best places to start when recording a drum kit is by using the one mic technique. This is simply the careful positioning of a certain microphone to capture the overall sound of the drums. Now, this is a really good technique because it allows you to be quite creative with your choice of microphone and also your choice of positioning. You might want to use a more sensitive mic, something that can't handle the higher SPLs but has a very nice tonal balance. as a more ambient position like this, over toward further away from the drums. This will obviously capture the sound of the room as well as the sound of the drums. So if it sounds nice, that could be a good way to work. Or you could go for a slightly closer, more kind of mid-distance setup like these two here. Now these would rely on the polar pattern, on the pickup pattern of the microphone, and you could actually start to tune the balance of the kit. So obviously pointing it towards the snare, and depending on where the position is, you can enhance the snare will become most prominent, and you could move it around to either reduce or enhance the amount of cymbals or the amount of kick drum or toms. So depending on how the performer's playing or how that performance is being played, you might find that using one microphone cleverly positioned actually works really well. There's a couple of examples here that you can explore further. Next one, kind of natural place to move on from this, is a two mic technique. Now, two mic technique is again a very standard and a very good place to start when recording drums. It can sound a bit more detailed than the one mic technique because we can start to pick out different parts of the kit. So, for example, in this example here, we've got the kick drum captured separately from the overheads. So if you think about how the sound will work, this microphone at the top will pick up the cymbals and the majority of the drum sounds and create an overall balanced sound, similar to a one mic technique. However, by adding an extra microphone on the kick drum, it means that when we come to the mix, we can rebalance slightly, so we can enhance or process the kick drum slightly separately. So this gives us a good kind of balance. And you can play with this. This is just an example of a placement, but you might find that moving this top one around, and depending on the type of microphone and the pickup pattern, you can create quite different results using this way. As standard, you'd use a dynamic for a kick drum because it can handle the higher SPLs, and then you'd think about maybe something like a condenser or a ribbon for the overhead, something that's quite detailed with a good tonal range to pick up the overall sounds. You could think about having the overhead and a snare, or a kick and a snare, and if the snare was maybe not too close, like basically this microphone at the snare, you might still get a nice rounded sound there, but with a bit more prominence of the snare. Here's some examples of the two mic technique. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the Beatles and Ringo Starr. So here's two examples using different microphones in this technique. So here we're using the D112, D1, the new one's called the D112, the D12, which is the kick drum microphone. You can see that's outside the shell. It's got cardioid pickup pattern pointing at the outer skin of the kick drum. And then above it, we've got this, I think that's a condenser mic, hanging above the kit, above Ringo's head, which is picking up the overall tone. In this version, we've replaced that top mic with a different one, with this Coles microphone, again to pick up the more balance of the top. So to expand or to kind of develop this, we could go for just a kick and snare mics. This is good because it can, depending on the performance, this can be really good for more rhythmic performances or more detailed playing. And it gives us a lot of control afterwards because we've got these two instruments fairly separate. Or the kick and the overhead, as described before, can give you this roomier kind of sound, this more overall sound. Now, the amount of mics you use is kind of up to you, and you'll find lots of different engineers have different ideas about how many mics to use. One of the kind of things that's kind of common with modern drum recording is people like to capture every single instrument separately. So they can use lots of different microphones, and they can choose the correct microphone for the correct type of instrument. So we looked last week about frequency response and polar patterns. So you can start to think about, okay, what type of microphone, what characteristics would enhance or complement the sound of this particular instrument. Expanding this idea of adding microphones until we end up with a kind of modern technique of using multiple microphones, close mic'd, so each instrument has its own microphone. Now this can be very helpful because it means we can tailor the microphone selection to the specific instrument, ensuring the frequency response and polar pattern are working well to capture that. And it also means we can enhance things like the attack or the tone of those specific instruments individually. this idea of close miking is really a kind of the standard kind of common method for modern drum recording, and it's the idea of isolating each individual instrument with a microphone. Now, it's very important here that we make sure that the microphone choice is suitable for the type of instrument you're recording, and also it can handle the type of volume that's being produced. We need to remember that the drum kit is a very loud instrument, and the levels of SPL which are generated close to the skin of the drums is very high. So be very careful when using sensitive microphones like condensers and ribbon mics that you don't actually create distortion. And then you should also bear in mind that the drums have their own characteristics, and then when added together, they have a different characteristics. So don't worry if it's taking time to get that correct combination of microphone and position together that's creating the overall sound that you want. It will take time, and it will take some experimentation to do. So be prepared for that. So now I've got some examples here of a kick drum with different positions, and so we can hear the tonal difference. So first of all, we've got the kick drum outside the shell. Okay, now we've got it halfway in. And then the last one is right inside. And the last bit I want you to consider for this week is the use of ambient mics. So we're talking about close miking to be able to capture individual instruments within the drum kit very accurately and using the microphones to their full advantage. I also want you to think about using an ambient mic, because whereas the one mic technique allows you to think about the overall sound, the close miking can end up feeling a bit more sterile. So by including an ambient mic, so by this I mean one that's further away from the drum kit, which is going to be capturing the overall sound of the room or the kit, we can use this to complement our close mics. So you can see in this example here, we've got close mics on every single instrument with an overhead capturing a kind of medium range or relatively close range sound. And then we've got this ambient mic, which is much further away, which is going to capture the overall tone of the drum kit. Okay, and so here we have an example that was made from Studio One by a previous technician here, and this demonstrates the difference between using close mics and ambient mics. So the first example I'm going to play you is just the close mics. It's worth having a little look to see what microphones have been chosen here, because this might be a nice starting point for your recordings also. So if we listen to just the close mics. Okay, so it sounds nice and tight. The sound of the drums is very nice. And now if we play the ambient mics. So you can hear immediately how much bigger it sounds there, how much more of the room and this kind of natural reverb we're capturing. Now if we listen to it mixed together, so this has got no extra processing, it's just all the microphones on. There you go. So I think you can hear the benefits there of mixing the ambient mic and the close mics together.